welcome to Running with Rainbows. It's your artist, Maya Larson, and today we're going to start our part one of playing with negative space. We're going to use watercolor today. As I mentioned on Instagram, you needed watercolor paper, watercolor paints, and mark making tools if you like. So Posca pens, Neocolors, crayons, white pencil crayons are recommended because white looks beautiful on dark. And we're going to maybe need some low tape if that is something that you want, if you want that crisp outline, but maybe you have a mat, so you can go all the way to the edge of the paper if you prefer. But these are some of the examples of what we're going to play today. As always, you do you though. Okay, so here I have some Jane Davenport watercolor and a Daler Rowney palette as well. I'm going to play with these today. I love my own hand mold paints that I showed you guys how to make in January this year. But every once in a while I want to try different colors, and I love magenta in fall and purples and beautiful rich oranges. Those to me are very fall palette colors. Black, stars, like I mentioned in the body of this text of this post here or podcast episode, there's lots of different inspirational themes that come with fall. So with negative space, I thought if it's easier for you to use die cut shapes, please go ahead. If you're a scrapbooker or somebody who has access to a die cut, or you want to just cut out shapes on hot pressed watercolor paper or cardboard, it's up to you. You can always go to Michael's or your Hobby Lobby or whatever you use for buying your creative supplies, and they have a lot of these packs available for very inexpensive, but you can always custom made them. So the ones I'm using today are a combination of the Nanas from Nikki de St. Phal's article in October of last year. I also was inspired by the Dancing Little Witch shapes from a Halloween book that I have, so I ended up creating some stencils of that. If you just have a plastic stencil, that's okay too. You can also just draw circles, which is what I did here. And there are lots of ways to place. You could create more of a pumpkin shape. You could make these, as I show you briefly, into sort of bonbons or candies. This one I tried, but it didn't quite go well, so I didn't even show it to you guys as an example as we move along, but that's okay. Play with your symbols and your ideas. Don't get discouraged by having this expectation that this is going to look perfect and you're going to make 6,000 cards for family and friends. You can definitely get there, but my classes are designed to give you that kickstart into your creativity, not necessarily to crank out fine artists. So this one is for the end. This one I'm going to show you how to be creative with an old watercolor that you maybe didn't go anywhere, and you can use it as a negative space practice piece, because we're going to layer on top of it with watercolor, and watercolor is not opaque. It's got that semi-translucent aspect to it, which is also maybe why I moved away from my natural mold paints, because they are a little thicker, and for translucency you need that waterier, less chalky pigment texture to your watercolor paint. So you could also do this class in watered down acrylics or acrylic ink if you like. So my recommendation whenever I'm playing with watercolor is start with my lightest colors first, moving towards warmer and darker to darkest at the very end. So please use 140 pound hot press or cold press watercolor paper if you want to do multiple layers. If you're aiming for about 4 or 5 colors, you're going to want good quality watercolor paper, or you will notice that it just doesn't hand up to the repeated washes. Otherwise, just maybe aim for 3 color changes. So I'm going to start with yellow because that's the lightest color on my palette. And then I'm going to move into sort of a magenta for some pink and orange. And then I'm going to finish off with blue, purple, black. Now, that's 5 colors. You could stop with blue. It gives you a very beautiful Halloween-y kind of enchanted, alive background effect, because you're not creating a clean wash. You're going to have variations in puddling and strokes, and and that's what we want for this particular piece. You don't necessarily want a homogeneous kind of graphic or design based piece. You can definitely do that if that's your flair, but I want my friends who maybe aren't as comfortable with this not to get all tight and worried about it looking like perfection. So I'm going to start this one. I've taped it down. You don't have to use the tape, but I wanted you guys to be able to see what I'm working on camera, because I'm going to work on a smaller piece to start. I do end up working on some 9 by 12 inch size pieces of watercolor paper, but that can be a lot, and you're going to want a big brush to fill in those spaces, as I'll show you. So here you would only need a couple of brushes, a small brush to outline the shapes so it's easier for you to paint around them and not accidentally dip into them, and then the big brush just to get going on the wash so that you're not frustrated with a lot of brush strokes, because in watercolor that can get really annoying. It's much more satisfying to have a big brush and work in a wash. So I am using a ballpoint pen because the pencil lines, as you'll see in the other ones I will demonstrate for you, are a bit harder for you to see on camera. So here they are going to be dark, and I don't mind. So first you're going to get your shape down. This one I'm going to do stars because that to me is very fall. We have less sunlight. This night sky really starts to take precedence. The Milky Way can be seen if you're away from the city or very late at night. So I love stars. I love going for walks in the morning when the stars are out, and at night as well, especially here in Canada, up north where we have longer nights as it is. So I've got my yellow wash done on the smaller sheet, and I'm going to quickly put a yellow wash on the top of these ones. As you see, this one is done in pencil, so it's a little more difficult for you to maybe pick up on camera, but I had traced out those cutout shapes that I showed you for this one, and I will use them repeatedly in the layers that follow. So here I'm going to put my lightest color on. If you want to use an orange or a different hued yellow, please feel free. You could definitely neutralize it and go for something a little less bright. But I'm just having fun. I don't want to really worry about palettes and perfection. I just want to have fun and see what happens when I layer on these watercolors in this particular order. So if you're impatient and you don't want to let days go by while you work on this and let things dry, grab yourself a little blow dryer and just blow it dry. It's really easy, and as long as you're careful and don't burn your paper or anything crazy, you'll be fine, and you can just keep going sort of and do this in one sitting instead of having to wait it out. But there is something to be said for just making it a slow craft as well. So you can let it dry in between and come back to it when it's dry, however that may be. But depends on your schedule, right, and how you allot yourself time for art. A lot of times my art is done in half-hour increments in between family activities or work, what have you. And at first it used to drive me crazy, but I've come to accept that it is a bit of a superpower, always making time for art and myself. So now I put more star patterns in. You could have done this at the very beginning. I just happened to take my time. I want it to be a bit organic. I may not want all those stars, and I've done them in a dark pen color, so now you're going to take your next shade. I am picking a nice hot pink fuchsia color, and I'm going to outline the yellow stars that I want to keep yellow, and then I'm going to wash over top of the ones that are going to ultimately at the end be fuchsia colored stars. So as you're doing this, remember, focus on your breath. Try not to hold it. Breathe in, breathe out. Make sure you clean your water if you need to. It's easy to get hyper-fixated on outlining and forget to look around your supplies and make sure everything's in the right space to use it. It would really be a bummer if you had grabbed a brush that had different color paint on it, right? So here I'm just going to outline all the stars that I want to keep yellow, and then that way, because it's sort of a wet barrier, the water won't bleed into the center of the star. It'll act as a line to stop water from going in. However, some of the water might seep in. Please don't get too upset. It's okay. It does add a beautiful effect to the piece. We're not going for perfection of design. You could do this on a computer as well in a digital program and just work in layers, but there's something to be said for how water interacts and for learning and absorbing the color theory. So here I've got my big brush. I'm just coming in between just to make this a bit quicker so I don't get frustrated with seeing all of the little brush strokes. There is something wonderful about that kind of texture. It just doesn't happen to be what I am aiming for today. So I'm just going to fill it in, let those outlined stars catch the wetter edge, and then they'll just sort of connect wet to wet instead of bleeding into the center of the stars themselves. So I could see this being a lot of fun doing it with like even latte cups, sort of celebrating that pumpkin spice vibe. You could do it with pomegranates. That would be a beautiful symbol as well. What's the signs of the year? It is Virgo season, so you could even negative space different zodiac signs. That'd be a fun theme to do. But to each his own. It is definitely fun to do more than one of these. So quickly filling it in, not worrying about everything being blended. Yes, it's going to puddle in some places, and I'm okay with that. You could even give it a little bit of spatter if you like. You might end up going over top of that, but it leaves an impression underneath. Again, we're working with watercolor, so that translucency, once everything is dry, really reveals sort of that cooperative part of making watercolor paint art. It isn't necessarily a science, although you can, elevate it to complete predictability. I like the unpredictable elements of watercolor because I feel like if there's none of that give and take between me and my unconscious or the superconscious or however you look, I just find the piece doesn't have it. So if it means leaving enough room for like conceptual air gap, I guess, so that you have room to find yourself in the art as well, is kind of an important element to making art that feels energetic and has an impact and doesn't just feel like dead on a page. In any case, next layer. So we've got our base layer shapes down here on that sheet. Now I'm going to come in and I'm going to outline them in my black paint pen or black pen. Again, you can just use pencil or you could do it freehand. If you're just doing circles, you're going to come in now and do more circles and you're going to fill it in with your next color. So I'm going to do the same thing here. All right, so now that that magenta layer is completely dry, you can see that now we're going to come in with our third color. So here is where If your paper is a 90-pound cold press paper or the inexpensive level of paper that you can get at Michael's, you may only get to this layer before your paper starts to do some funky stuff like pill or tear or just look really fragile. So then that's okay. You could use purple, you could use black or blue, and that'll definitely make all of these beautiful colors underneath that we've highlighted pop. So just have fun going around all of your new shapes that you've left purple. So on the side of this beautiful yellow witch, I've got a Nana and a heart that I will leave in the pink color and work all the way around, filling it in with purple. Okay, as you see here, I'm coming in with some blue watercolor paint on top of my purple. I have some heavy watercolor paper, so I'm not worried about the quality of the paper at this point. I'm just having fun now bringing forward those lighter versions and the purple versions of the stars, still maintaining the original yellow that we started out with our lightest color. Now you can see how that negative space has some energy and life to it because it's not just a flat texture under that color. It's not opaque. There is different movement and hues that affect the value of the paint on top of it, which I think makes it way more interesting. So I hope you guys have had fun using 4 colors. You can, of course, go over top of this with black as well and keep some of the stars blue, especially if you're using good quality watercolor paper. But that is entirely up to you. I'm going to now fill in the dancers that I have. They've been drying with the magenta on them. Oh, I just love it. And try to give yourself some space too. We're going to come in at the end of all of this with some Posca pens or watercolor pencils or neocolors or oil pastels. Like, there's lots of ways to add more elements if you felt like you just didn't get enough with your layers, but your paper maybe is telling you that it's done. One thing to think about too is if you're matting this, if you're going to put it in a little mat, some of those edges maybe don't obsess about because they're going to get covered up with the mat. And that might be something too. If you have a mat, one of those little white paper frames that we like to use with our pictures hanging around, you can always see if your composition is jiving with you by putting it on top of it and just sort of having a look at it. You see movies directors do it with their hands all the time. And that's a fun way to sort of ask yourself if you feel like it's done, or if you lose those pieces of the picture, does the composition still warrant the changes that you'd like to make? And those are all things that trial and error will help you figure out for yourself. So here's the fun part. If you struggle to get tape off, one option too, I had done it just before I started peeling, was warm it up with your blow dryer. It sort of reactivates the gum underneath and allows it just to lift without tearing. So I love it. So you're going to want to let everything dry as well, and then you can come in with some Posca pens and mark making tools. So last, before we get into the mark making, I want to show you if you had a chaos layer or an old piece of art that is monochromatic or in one color, you can kind of use it as well in a sort of a negative space piece too. So I'm just going to show you here. You don't have to do this one, but I just wanted to give you, again, like a little Kickstarter, a little, maybe I do have a stack of watercolors that I could kind of have fun exploring, a more abstracted or expressionist form of negative space. So I'm adding in the yellow just because blue is a very cool, very flat shade, I guess I want to say. I feel like I always need kind of red, yellow, and blue in anything I do, just because then there's more potential for the eye to catch different hues, especially with watercolor, because some of this is going to touch on each other, so there'll be orange areas where the magenta and yellow really overlap, where the yellow and the blue hit, there'll be more of a green tone, and I kind of think that's a lot of fun when you're just sort of filling in between. I'm using this red to kind of go through all the empty space as my second color or third color, I guess, because we've got the blue, we've got some of the yellow, which you could just say it was like a layer, but we didn't go yellow over top of everything because I didn't want to turn everything green immediately, but I did need yellow. I needed that pop. So I'm listening to my intuition and just trying it. This is for me and you guys because you're here watching me, but if you're worried about cringe, I would say this is your opportunity not to care. Because you have to make the mistakes. You have to be in that mindset growth, the beginner mindset or growth mindset. One of the, in my 20s, I spent a lot of time learning about theosophy and sort of meditation ideas and spiritual study. And the notion of leaving my ego at the door became something that I really had to work through. And I feel like I'm much better able to do now. So once you get that layer dry, again, figuring out what you want to come in with some mark making tools. These are things I have on hand. These are pencil crayons. White is going to give you great line work, especially if you don't have a Posca pen or you don't have a white oil crayon, that's fine too. I love the Neo colors because they are not non-drying like a oil-based pen, so I can varnish them if I want. This I'm just going to go in and I'm going to have some fun making smaller stars. I also want to use my pointed tip pen for some swirly whirlies. I learned how to use this taking Instagram. I think her name is Becca. She offered a wonderful calligraphy course this summer, so I really got to know how to use this pen a lot more. And it definitely, again, it adds that whimsical element, and it's unpredictable because if you're using the pen, it goes thick and thin. But I've learned how to load the ink on it properly, so now I can get it to go quite a long ways on the page before I have to re-dip the nib, and I love that. So here I'm going to use colors in the Neo colors. They're a wax-based, well, they're not a wax crayon, but they're not a crayon. Anyway, they're awesome. But instead of using pastels, which I have a harder time getting to fix properly on a paper without smearing right off, these stay where they want them to, and you can varnish over top of them if you fix them with a fixative. So here I'm just going to add more marks and information in the areas that are now the negative space around these shapes. So we started with stencils to create negative space and then slowly brought in different hues, different colors to add more depth and layer. And now we have negative space within negative space. So here I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with this. I felt like they were a little too round to be pumpkins, but that would be a fun way to go with this shape option too, using a circle. So I ended up going in with the idea of like Halloween candy. So I just made sort of squiggly V-shaped lines at the edge of each circle that I wanted to make a candy. And then I ended up getting braver and grabbing a white Neo color crayon and just really leaning into the texture and fun and more childlike design idea for this instead of trying to make it illustrative. So I sort of embraced the abstract and wasn't super worried about getting it to look like an adult did it. If that makes any sense. Halloween and fall to me are so children focused, and I love that. Going back to school, like I said, I released the kit list that I like to have, or things that I suggest you sort of see if you already have in your stock, so that if you revisit classes, you've already got some of the stuff. A new product you might want to look into is the cyanotype solution. I'm going to offer a part 2 class this month on negative space using cyanotype prints. I had a really good time being inspired by the beautiful blue skies here in Manitoba and in between our unfortunate forest fires that are happening up north, which seem to be on the contained side today because we've had some wonderful rain, but those blue skies have been a source of inspiration and positivity. So the cyanotype classes were inspired by that and making use of the sun. In Manitoba, we do get lots of UV light in the winter, but I don't know that cyanotype solution can handle -30 weather in the sun. Human beings don't even want to. So this piece, you know what, I really liked it. It was a lot of fun to experiment and try. Neo color crayons actually are wonderful because they can go on top of wet paper. So here I had done a layer of violet underneath, but I went in with black watercolor at the very end just to sort of push it right off the background, and now I'm going over top with my Neo color crayons, and they can go right through the wet watercolor with no problems. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this part 1 sort of basic look at negative space using stencils or die cuts, and we'll talk a little bit more about negative space in the art at large as we cover the cyanotype class in a couple weeks. As always, please share what you make. I would love to see it, and happy creating, friends!